Jeff Zeleny, I want to go to you. Trump, of course, has been very critical of U.S. aid for Ukraine. He has vowed to end this war in 24 hours. He says that he knows how to do it. How much of a priority is ending the war for the Trump team right now?
It's absolutely a priority. I mean, of course, there is a long list of things that the president-elect would like to do on day one, but Ukraine is certainly, if not at the top, quite near the top of that list. We have heard repeatedly for months on the campaign trail the former president talking explicitly about how if he was in office, this would not have happened. Of course, that is an open question, to say the least, but he is absolutely intent on trying to end the conflict there. But, Alex, it's more complicated than just a ceasefire. If there is a ceasefire, the negotiations of what come next are certainly a challenge, at the very least, for this administration and the reshaping of the region potentially. And this is also one of the political battles that we're going to see play out likely next year. Mitch McConnell, of course, the outgoing Republican Senate leader, is no longer going to be in leadership, but he is going to be in a leading position, a voice of authority among the Republicans who are still hawkish, if you will. So this is one of the big divides inside the Republican Party. We will see sort of how that plays out with the president-elect. But he's definitely interested in trying to end the war. Of course, that's easier said than done. The question is how and exactly what he will do on that front. One thing, of course, we all remember is how he pressured European allies and a NATO to pay more of their share. Expect similar arguments to come back as soon as he's in office.
Yeah, and as a result, a lot of nervousness in European capitals
sure.
and, of course, in Kyiv. Jeff Zeleny, Orrin Lieberman, thank you both very much. Let's bring in CNN military analyst, retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton, and Evelyn Farkas, who is a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia and Ukraine. Thank you both for being with me. Evelyn, I want to start with you. You heard that Trump officials are expected to try to freeze this conflict in order to make way for negotiations. What's your sense so far from what we're hearing of those early moves that Trump could make to end this war?
Well, Alex, it sounds like he could certainly threaten, as you've already suggested and Jeff suggested, he would threaten the Ukrainians with cutting off assistance if they didn't play ball, if they didn't negotiate in good faith. The Ukrainians, of course, are happy to negotiate. And in fact, they would probably welcome a bit of a pause. I just came back from Ukraine about 2 weeks ago. People there are quite tired. Of course, President Trump now also has to put some kind of pressure on Vladimir Putin. And the question is whether he will do what he suggested in the past, that he will tell Vladimir Putin if he doesn't negotiate, he'll continue to provide arms to Ukraine.
Cedric, you just heard Orrin also talking about General Keith Kellogg, who was just named Ukraine envoy. He has proposed this plan that calls for that military aid to be conditioned on Kyiv, depending on whether they participate in potential peace talks with Russia. What is your reaction as a former military man to Kellogg getting this position? What could it mean, do you think, for the level of U.S. support and Ukraine's eventual possible NATO membership?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting, Alex, to see exactly how this plays out, because a lot of the details, as we've talked about, are kind of vague at this point. But I think General Kellogg is a better choice than former Ambassador Grinnell would have been, because General Kellogg at least has an understanding of the military situation in Ukraine. He also has an understanding of some of the nuances involved in the Ukraine situation. Now, on the one thing that I think would be positive for Ukraine is the idea that if Russia does not negotiate in a way that is acceptable to the United States, then of course the risk is that to Russia would be that the United States would reopen a spigot of aid to the Ukrainians. But as we've seen with the $7 billion or so that's in the pipeline right now, spending that wisely and spending that effectively will definitely be a challenge, especially if it's a short notice type situation.
Evelyn, of course, the U.S. has quite a bit of leverage over Ukraine because they send so much aid. But what about on the Putin side? He has shown little willingness to negotiate. His forces are taking more and more territory every day in Ukraine, particularly in the eastern part of Ukraine. Why do you think he would negotiate now? And if he's less than willing, how could the incoming Trump administration compel him to?
Yeah, I mean, Vladimir Putin thinks that time is on his side and that he'll get a better deal with President Trump. he thinks that although his economy is very strained and he doesn't have sufficient manpower, and he doesn't want to call for a full mobilization of Russian men, which is why he brought in the North Korean men. He still thinks that he can hang in there and outlast the Ukrainians. But if President Trump is credible in basically threatening to provide Ukraine with what it needs to retake territory and to hold on to the Russian territory, then that puts pressure on Putin, because this war is not popular in Russia. So every day he has to wait. And if he thinks that Ukraine now has time on its side, meaning President Trump will back Ukraine, he will then be more motivated to seek a deal. But ultimately, Vladimir Putin is probably not going to want to give up any territory, and Ukraine won't either unless they get a security guarantee.
And one of the reasons, as the Biden administration sees it, that Ukraine is losing territory, Cedric, is because they simply don't have the manpower to hold it. They're losing troops. They're not able to rotate out troops. Troops are deserting. We learned today that the Biden administration is pushing Ukraine to lower the recruitment age to as low as 18. It's currently 25, so they want to lower it by 7 years. They want Kyiv to do that. How critical is Ukraine's lack of troops?
Oh, it's exceptionally critical, Alex, and it's been critical really from the start of this conflict. In a rather unique situation, there are Ukrainians who are in the 18 to 25 age bracket who are fighting, but they are doing it more or less as volunteers. But it is definitely a difference in the way, for example, we would conduct a war like this compared to the Ukrainians. And it would make absolute sense for the Ukrainians to tap into the manpower pool of 18 to 25-year-olds in order to fight this war. They need to replenish their ranks. And failure to do that is something that is, of course, weakening the Ukrainians right now. And it's something that is more or less a self-inflicted wound as opposed to something that's not under their control.
One of the points that a senior administration official made to a number of reporters, including myself, in a briefing call today, Evelyn, was that, in the States, the age is 18, and that 18 to 24 bracket of young soldiers, they're the healthiest, they're the fittest, and that's why there's so much focus here in the United States on that. Meanwhile, you've got this minimum age of 25 in Ukraine. Why do you think the Zeleny government has been so reluctant to lower that recruitment age if their needs are indeed so great?
Well, two reasons. One, Alex, is economic. They had a lot of people flee the country. Millions of people fled. And so I think it's about 7 million are still outside of Ukraine. Most of them, of course, are women, but that's part of the economy. So they can't let all the manpower go to the front. That's a reality. And when I was there, what I found was, unfortunately, it's not just shortages at the front, but they have shortages across society and in government. The second reason is political, because, of course, President Zeleny has now been in office 5 years. Every electorate gets kind of sick of their president and would like elections. The Ukrainian people understand that they can't have elections while they're at war. But if President Trump brings peace, then there will be elections. And if President Zeleny wants to run, and most people assume he would, he will be an unpopular president running after having lowered the age to 18.
Just remarkable number of dynamics at play here, and so much hanging in the balance for Ukraine. Evelyn Farkas, Cedric Leighton, thank you both.